how your brain computes. It's simple but deceivingly clever. Every neural system in every animal finds clever ways to accomplish one feat, and that one computational feat is all you need to know to see completely how your brain works. It is so basic and fundamental that it is hard to talk about because it is so obvious. But this feat is repeated by hundreds of millions of little computation engines in your skull when perceiving, remembering, and thinking everything that you can perceive, remember, or think, or doing anything you can do. The unit of nervous system computation. What is that one thing? What is that unit of computation? It came to me as a computational cognitive neuroscientist back over 50 years ago. I was not alone. That feat goes by many names in English. Examples are a recognition, a discrimination, a classification, or detecting a signal. It's what your nerves do for a living. The math for the feat is simple. It is a function that takes a bunch of input signals and outputs a bunch of new signals that are true or right for that context. I'll call it a Psi function PSI, which takes as inputs signals that are useful for a discrimination or classification of the sources of those signals, and as output a ordered set of decisions about what those signals signify. So, output signals equal to Psi input signals, or O equal to Psi I. Our brains are computing with literally hundreds of millions of different PSI functions in just a couple of seconds. This is happening all the time. This is happening as you read these sentences. No computer or computing system that we have been able to build to date can come close to doing this so precisely, correctly, and completely as your brain is doing right now. There is not one way that all PSI functions work. There are almost certainly thousands of different kinds of them in your nervous system, and millions of different PSI functions of every kind. But each one, whether it is just light being registered by a neuron in your eye, or a great new idea, or telling an entire new story, you find them by a PSI function in your brain. Part of the way these PSI functions are orchestrated is how the inputs and outputs of the PSI functions are innately wired together. They can operate in networks, and such organizations of CSI functions are capable of amazing computations. And while we know this is true, and we know you can easily prove it to yourself, even though the details of the orchestration and the discrimination computations inside the PSI functions are a ways from being fully understood by me, you, or anybody in today's science. That does not mean that you cannot basically understand how your brain works. Everything a human can perceive, remember, think, and do, you can easily confirm as an orchestration of CSI functions. PSI functions can, for example, know how to take light impinging on the neurons in your eyes, and ultimately recognize your pet dog jumping for a ball. They know how you see the ball, pick it up, and throw it. They know how to think about the gravity that keeps pulling you, the ball, and your dog around, and how much fun you are having with her. They know how to realize how to put your words together to say, good dog. And they know how you understand the sentence of a friend who says, wow, that was a high jump. Your activity, and the activity of the friend and your dog for that matter, literally uses millions of these little PSI functions in near real time in your, his, and her nervous systems. My PhD thesis back in 1976 studied how all these recognition memories worked in the perception of causation as communicated by what people can say in their natural spoken language. Causation is a big deal in brain computation. There are functions among the millions that keep track of it and know it when they see it or want it to happen. I have been studying this stuff for a long time, but only recently has the science been able to really confirm how completely true this simple idea of neural computation really is. Using fMRI and other ways to look at the neurons computing, we can see it in the neurons lighting up in real time. In AI, using these PSI functions or enhanced perceptrons, we have the deep learning revolution you see today as our machines say things out loud, see things we can see, recognize things we can recognize, and do things we can do. Here is the best possible book if you want to jump into this science of what many of the functions are, how they work, and what they do. The Deep Learning Revolution. Amazon.com. The Deep Learning Revolution. Audible Audio Edition. Terrence J. Sednowski. Sean Compton. Tantor Audio. www.amazon.com. The details include what some of the different kinds of functions are and how they are orchestrated together in order to do some of what our brains and neural systems do for a living. We are still learning more of the details. We are still a ways from understanding all the detail, but we have also come a ways from what we knew for sure 50 years ago. But if we ignore the detailed computations, the electrochemistry, the ion movements, the molecular interactions, the wiring, and energy production, and just know these are all, nevertheless, just compositions for abstract functions. We don't need to know the details to see how the brain works. Furthermore, as you will see, We can make useful predictions just knowing Psi functions are the fundamental mechanism in how any brain computes. I have argued for many years that human natural language is the best window on how the brain computes. If you carefully observe the language you fluently speak, you can confirm the computational completeness and power of these Psi functions. You don't need to know electrochemistry or neurophysiology. This is precisely because natural language is evolved precisely to most efficiently and completely allow one brain to communicate its computations to another brain. Natural language is nearly perfectly speaking in the language of brain computation, the computation of any nervous system, but, and this is important, only a human can appreciate it. Natural language is unique to humans. Dogs can't talk or understand a natural language like the kind that humans understand, so they are limited by what they can communicate about what they are perceiving, remembering, thinking, and doing. But for you and your friend, you can talk all about what your dog is doing and plan new things for your dog to try, and complain about getting tired while she just keeps bringing the ball back. A friend of yours watching y'all play ball can say, "I'm getting hungry," and you can know from what he said to say, "Let's get some food," long before your dog can possibly get that message. But she'll probably get the message quickly once she realizes y'all are heading for the kitchen. So how do you directly experience all these little Psi functions going off inside your brain? You can do it by observing yourself understanding any sentence. You already know how. You just have to know how to look for it. For this, you need to know the minimum unit of truth in your brain. We've known this for at least 1,000 years already. You can see that in natural language. This is the basic type of function, and you can observe it in natural language. It is technically called a unary predication or unary proposition. The function takes as its inputs a subject and other input signals as I, and outputs at least one predication O on that subject in signal context. Again, all the math you need to know is O equal to psi. If you take a course in logic, you learn that a subject or a predicate do not necessarily have truth value. Jump and dog are neither true or false. You need to form a proposition or predication, the dog jumped, which can be true or not. Actually, there is a detail of another Psi function that I just left out, which is very important. The dog is itself another unary predication, as in, it is this dog. Oh yes, and there is still another function that I also left out. The past tense jumped refers to a dog jump, the Psi function above, which happened in the past, still another Psi function. Remember, there are millions of Psi functions just waiting for inputs that activate their outputs in your brain. We know we can all see these surface grammatical Psi units because we are all taught to draw such grammar diagrams for sentences in school. The word level grammar of a sentence is such a hierarchy of unary predications in any sentence in any human language. One subject, one predicate, per unary predication or proposition can be true or false. And any predication can serve as a subject or predicate in another predication that can be true or false. Wow, that was a high jump. The wow is your friend's brain telling your brain that the subject of the following predication is what is in his brain that he knows is probably in your brain too. That is the subject he knew you saw because he saw it. The predicate of that was a high jump. Jump is now the subject of high, and in high jump is now the subject of a. These are all unary propositions. One subject, one predicate in a hierarchy of subjects, and predicates, some of which are actually unary predications themselves. Natural language word ordering for English is also confirmed by still other Psi functions that are recognizing which words are playing what grammatical roles in the sentence, and also recognizing that the sentence makes grammatical as well as semantic sense. The words constitute a complete and understandable sentence. Yes, correct word order is something you recognize and you have Psi functions for. Putting words in order, use these as well when you speak. There are a very large number of functions computing all the time in your brain. Still other Psi functions are recognizing, for example, that what you actually perceive the dog do is the subject of the pronoun that as a predication. We know from our science that this incredibly simple sentence is also lighting up lots of other predications that are true with respect to their predication context in the moment. We know there are Psi predications about where you, your friend, and your dog are, where the ball is, the floor, and what kind of place like the room or yard you are in, how and if you can get to the ball, what your dog is going to do now that it has the ball in its mouth, all the things your dog might do next, all the things you might do or say to your friend, all the other feelings also going on inside your body. The list goes on and on. Such a simple sentence as, wow, that was a high jump, can ordinarily light upwards of 90 million neurons in your brain. Millions, not just a handful, of Psi functions to do all this perception, thinking, remembering, and action your brain is computing. all in a few seconds. Unlike the lies you are told, the brain is not just a gummy blob. It is an amazingly fast, precise, exact, and environmentally truthful computation engine. There is nothing squirrely going on in your brain. It is also not like that computer with a CPU and memory that you learned about in school. It is millions and millions of these Psi functions recognizing that input signals mean certain things are currently true either of the world or the world of the other Psi functions. The surface grammar of the words in the sentence also lit up a deep grammar that understands the meaning being communicated. If you want to observe the Psi functions and what they are in your head, you can see them by just the kind of analysis we have just done on that one sentence. You can agree or disagree that that jump was a wow. You can know if your dog can jump higher and might want to mention that to your friend. That is, you might mention it to your friend if you think that would be a friendly thing to say to him. You might not even know that your brain was recognizing if that your dog could jump higher until your friend said what he said about how high that jump was, and you and your friend can incredibly talk about such things. This should give you a glimmer of how monumentally impressive your brain is at computation. You can recognize all the unary predications in all the sentences you are reading right now. It all fits somehow into what you know, and you know if you are learning something new which might be true and important to remember in real time. This is our uniquely human capability. Human natural language is uniquely human, and that gives us unique power and unique dangers too. Sentences and lies. The computational cognitive neuroscience of lies is called Mendesiology. Lies are interesting because they show how brains deal with propositions that are not true, or if true are deceiving other Psi functions. A property of natural language that most informs us how the brain computes is the list of language universals. These are properties of any human language. For example, every human language uses sentences. Every human language has nouns and verbs. Every human language has a hierarchical graph of the surface grammar of the words and inflections in that language. And, importantly, every sentence can itself be predicated with a context. A language universal is that every sentence can be a lie, and every sentence can be the truth, if you allow it to be put into a sentence context that predicates the truth, or lies in the predications composing the sentence. Let's say that, wow, that was a high jump, has the following Psi functions for its literal meaning, where the first part is the subject and the second the predicate. 1. Wow, that was a high jump. 2. That was a high jump. 3. A high jump was. 4. High jump A. 5. Jump high. Normally, when someone just says something, and the immediate context is not troublesome in terms of the contextual psi functions, it is just confirmed as understood and true. But what happens when any of the propositions composing the literal meaning is not true in the context? Well, try them. Here we go. Making each of the 5 functions false. Well, it wasn't a wowing or impressive high jump. 2. Well, what was a high jump? What's that? I didn't see any jump. 3. Well, I didn't see the dog jump. He was just sitting there. 4. Well, there was no high jump that I know about. 5. Well, the jump wasn't high. Any one of the component unary propositions, if it cannot be confirmed as true by the mutually agreed predication context, makes the whole sentence questionable. It will elicit psi functions that question the speaker for explanation or explain to the speaker why it was understood differently than he might have thought. Now, amazing things happen when we change the predication context of the sentence. For example, we can predicate it as some fiction. If we do, as long as the sentence happened somewhere, sometime, then all the propositions could be seen as perfectly fine and true. The Psi functions confirming just a literal meaning is possible is a subset of the additional Psi functions that confirm the truth of each. Lies come out of this. My friend could have said, your dog can't jump very high. I saw a dog yesterday and wow, that was a high jump. And he might be lying, but you dig into what propositions he was lying about to find out. Lies naturally arise in Psi functions, and these can be dangerous to your life. Here is a sentence to analyze for the Psi function recognitions that come to mind in hearing and thinking about the following sentence uttered by one of the most dangerous liars of our time. Just say the election was corrupt, and leave the rest to me and the congressman. Donald Trump trying to get people in the Department of Justice to say a fiat lie to the public and also accidentally mentioning his co-conspirators in his sedition. Fiat lies are genocide on the human race. The Internet Court of Lies. Medium.com. What computation goes on inside a function. I have long believed that this didn't matter very much to understand how the brain computes. Indeed, when we have been lucky enough to inspect the discrimination classification functions in terms of how different types compute, we see many different types among different parts of the nervous system. There are obvious examples this observation is true. For example, the neurons that see light and classify it compute differently from the neurons to hear sound and classify it. Some people have suggested there might be hundreds of different types once we find them all. Other people, like me, believe there might be thousands of types, each with different ways to compute the Psi function they compute in the human nervous system. But they are all still Psi functions, so it is still easy to understand. It is not obvious that the different types have that much to do with how the brain computes as long as they perform the Psi function on the inputs and outputs they were designed to compute. But all Psi functions seem to have some tiring properties that appear to be universal. We see in nearly every Psi function that it can become confused and lose its ability to perform the discrimination with too much or too little time or use. We see this tiring also in AI models and many other statistical pattern recognition methods. This failure mode is a very general characteristic in statistical pattern recognition systems. A common neural network modeling problem is overtraining or undertraining, which may leave the Psi functions missing or making the wrong discriminations they would normally be able to make reliably. In effect, the Psi functions start to fail naturally and need some form of reset to get them discriminating well again. This is a form of noise, like a squeaky door that needs oil. So here is another prediction you can make from just knowing that Psi functions are how your brain computes. It can tell you why you have to get sleep to live. A noise model for why we sleep. And lie, too. Perhaps English had a point. Medium.com.thankyou.historical reference to validate claim. This computation model was understood before 1983. This describes the CAPS modeling system using advanced perceptron theory developed a decade before deep neural networks were first developed. Note the limitations of existing computing hardware to support the needed computations. This system was set up to model and predict eye movements in reading, intermodal processing of visual, motor, natural language, and other neocortical processing. CAPS, a language for modeling highly skilled knowledge-intensive behavior,